conservative, constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
And welcome, everybody, to another amazing week right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. It's another interview episode. I'm joined by Senator Lindsey Tichenor. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
To those of you listening on the radio or TV or anywhere else, this is going to be another one of those episodes where the start-stops are a little bit abrupt. It can seem like it maybe is in the middle of it simply because I don't want to interrupt the flow of conversation as we're going simply for commercial breaks. So if you have an issue with that, you can always go over to theandrewshow.com, click the Listen Now tab, and see all the different places where you can listen to the podcast at. Moderately less interrupted. There's still ads, but it is less interrupted, and sometimes the ads are flow a little bit better. But regardless, you can head over there. But without further ado, let's dig down into it. So, Senator, I had you out here today because there's a big flare-up going on up in Oldham County, which is in your district, regarding a data center. And it's interesting to see the public response. The other thing that's interesting to me about it is how this came about. Who brought it about too? That's kind of interesting when you look at the public response from in the area. So first, why don't we just break it down for people? What's going on with this data center? Just fill in all the background so people understand.
Okay. And then we'll get into a lot of details, I'm certain.
Yeah. No. Go into all the details you want.
Yes. So there is a proposed hyperscale data center, which is different than data centers. Data centers have been around for a long time and they're all over the place. You don't even know it. This is hyperscale. So you're talking really heavy industrial property. This one in particular would be located right in the middle of rural Oldham County on 267 acres, 40 acres of buildings, 7 stories tall. It will utilize 600 megawatts of power, which is about 450,000 households worth of power. So very significant. It needs about 7 million, I think, gallons of water a day to keep the servers cool. So huge impact.
That's a
huge
lot.
Impact. Yeah. So a lot of things there that we could break down. Really, how this came about. Data centers are popping up all over the place, these hyperscale in particular, with the rise of AI. And I have my own opinions about AI and its need and use and some concerns with that. But ultimately, they need a tremendous amount of data and servers to operate. And that has led to these hyperscale centers, which are taking lots of rural communities. Traditionally, you think these absolutely need to go into an industrial zoned area. Makes sense.
Sure.
There's not a lot of industrial zoned areas that have hundreds of acres available. So they're looking out.
Well, you think they got to look for good power infrastructure.
They got to look for the power infrastructure. Yep. They need fiber. They need lots of water. Yeah. Those are, so they're looking outside of traditional zoning to place these huge facilities. And so Oldham was chosen. We have a power line that comes right from the Trimble County LG&E KU plant and, right on the river there, and it runs through this property, and it seemed to meet the needs of this developer, who isn't the end user. This is just a developer who's going to get the process moving.
So this is just the developers building it,
yes,
right?
Yes. So we don't know who the end user is going to be. That's confidential.
Okay. But they have somebody in mind.
I don't know.
Because
I would assume.
Not to get off track of this data center.
Yeah.
But there was another data center in Louisville.
Yeah.
That was built.
The one in Rubbertown.
Yeah.
It is in the process. Yes. These are different developers.
They're different developments.
Absolutely.
We'll
totally
return
different.
to this other one too, because there's a greater discussion about what is government incentivizing and why.
Yeah, we'll get there.
That here, but I've heard that they're having trouble finding a tenant for the data center downtown.
Oh, really?
I have heard that from a few
that's news to me.
People in the know. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and I mentioned you're coming on the show, and we were talking about why they go through it, and this person, is professionally involved with this stuff.
Yeah.
And they're like, I'm having trouble finding a tenant for that one, which is surprising.
Well, they've got one under construction in Jeffersonville, Indiana as well, right there, right when you cross over that East End Bridge. And I drove by that. That one, I think, it's an $800 million project. And the one they're proposing in our county, $6 billion project. So significantly larger. But that one in Jeffersonville is will be a Meta data center.
Will be for Facebook. Yeah. And I guess there was, we'll return to this, but I guess some claim is there was heartburn that we didn't get it and Jeffersonville, Indiana did. But we'll go. We'll go into some of the government policies. I'm not privy
to a lot of those conversations.
Yeah. Well, we'll go into some of the government policies in a bit. But return to this data center. Yeah. So it's massive. It's huge. It's large. 7 acres tall.
Seven stories tall, 40 acres.
40 acres big. Yeah. Sorry, seven stories tall, 40 acres big. But I can make an argument here to say, look, you're just mad because you hate AI. If those were 7-story tall rick houses being built for distillery,
we wouldn't want that either.
You would be fine with it.
No, I wouldn't. Yeah. No, I hear you. I think it's best use of property. And right there, you've got horse country. You've got people who, work their whole lives to move to Oldham County to live in the country. And now they're going to have a, huge facility, heavy industrial facility behind their property. It's not an appropriate place at all.
So what do you say here? And I guess we can go into government policies here with this, but a natural inclination, and I struggle with this myself. For an example, one thing that I've struggled with, like debating in my head, like the issue. So there was a law or is a law. I can't remember. And that's a hard part about these longer conversations. People realize I sometimes have to refresh myself on some things before I just talk on camera. But there was a law about billboards along Kentucky highways. Something about beautification or something like that. And they weren't allowing billboards for a while. And then maybe a law changed to allow it or not allow it. I just remember there was a debate around putting billboards up along the highway. And, people would say, well, I don't want to see it. It looks ugly. I want to be able to look at your land and see it's beautiful.
Yeah.
But it misses the point that that's my land.
Right.
And two, I have to pay property taxes on this land. It doesn't come free.
Yeah.
And so forcing property owners that have, this acreage to basically have to go bankrupt, give up their land, do other things. Here in Lexington, they basically force them to give up the property development rights because they, tax them so high, and then they give them $10 million or something like that to just say, hey, promise us, sign this saying you'll never build like a house, a development on this land. They specifically don't want you building houses on that land. And they'll sign that, and then they get $10 million. It's enough to pay the property taxes for the next few years, but then, it becomes an issue.
Yeah.
Point of all that saying, how do you balance the community wanting to look at somebody's piece's land versus somebody having to pay for that land?
Yeah. No, I don't know anything about that billboard law. That would have been before my time, I'm sure. But, so that comes down to planning and zoning. That comes down to a county's comprehensive plan, which Oldham County's in the middle of redoing our comprehensive plan right now. And we're in the middle of just looking at planning and zoning, making sure we have things in place. It goes back to like my drag bill, right? Like I wanted a statewide standard so it could at minimum be this distance away from schools, this, for adult entertainment. And it's just like that. If planning and zoning says, hey, we want to really have very strict regulations around adult entertainment because we don't want it in our county, they can do that. And if it's in line with the comprehensive plan of their county that the county all has input on, then that's the way it should go. If somebody says, hey, I don't want a billboard that's taller than 20 feet in the county. All right, let's talk about that in planning and zoning and really leave that to the local government. What's the problem with the data center in Oldham County in particular?
Center, though, that's a little bit different, I guess, of a conversation because it's not just like somebody a data center approached them and
Right.
said, hey, I'd like to buy your land, and they're just doing a private business deal. Government has gotten involved. Let's talk about that.
No, absolutely. But the problem that we have right now with Oldham County, and what I would argue most of the state, no one's prepared for a hyperscale data center according to their local ordinances. Most people don't have any idea what that is. Kentucky doesn't have any hyperscale yet. Obviously, we're moving in that direction, but so nobody has anything in place. So we're all, for Oldham County, we're going, wait a second, let's just slow this whole thing down and get something in our ordinances to put restrictions around these. And I would argue there needs to be some statewide restrictions so that we are making sure these aren't infringing on other people's property values. They're not, utilities aren't going to go up for people who live in the community. They can't be right next to a school. They can't be right next to certain places.
Outside of the visual side of this giant thing, what are the negative effects on a community of bringing in this kind of project?
So in my research, which I became aware of this at the end of March when Oldham County, the Oldham Era, put out their or they put their news release out about the project. So that was my first inclination, and I started research. My research isn't long, right? I've just had a couple of months digging in, but it's been a deep dive. So when you get one data center, when the path has been made to get one in, whether it's the way they're trying to do in Oldham County, where they have applied for a conditional use permit without changing zoning, right? So this property is agricultural zoned and conservation zoned already. They are not going to change the zoning. They're just conditional use permit, and they're calling themselves a private utility. So if we don't have anything in place and that moves through that way, then any other data center can find another piece of property in our county and say, well, here we go. I'm going here too. So you run the risk of multiple data centers coming in, and you can look at Loudoun County, Virginia as an example of that. They have 200 plus. I can't remember the exact number. They have several data centers. They're taking up thousands of acres in Loudoun County, Virginia. Tremendous strain on their power and utilities. They're also bringing in a tremendous amount of tax revenue. So that's, the draw there. But once the path's made,
How do they
they're
bring
coming.
in tax revenue? Because
just property value.
And that would be, because I look at, and this goes into where, while I can look at something and say property rights, not property rights, it gets a little hairy, and you're introducing community input into these projects when you especially have the state government handing out such things. So we talked about the Louisville data center. In the revenue bill in 2022, they got a 50-year sales tax exemption. So they do not have to pay any sales taxes, kind of like a nonprofit. For 50 years.
I think that was in 24. It was
24
during my time. It was HB 8 brought that in. So there was a 50-year or a 25-year tax sales tax exemption, HB 8. This year it was HB 775, came in as a committee sub, very last minute, a few hours before a vote.
Went from like
all
4
that kind
pages
of stuff
to 170 pages.
All that kind of stuff that drives me absolutely insane. That brought in a sales and use tax exemption. So 50 years, 25 years, that's kind of the going rate to attract a data center across the nation.
Which leads to the question of, that's like your only source of revenue as a state off of these facilities.
Well, it is a huge source of revenue for sure, but the property value and the property tax is where the bulk of it will be. So if you buy your piece of property, whatever you purchase it for, and then you add $6 billion of, that has value too, then you're taxing that.
But who's getting that revenue?
Well, it's supposed to be your local government. It's supposed to be the schools, it's the ambulance, the fire.
I guess that's my point. So why is the state? The only way the state makes money off these projects is the sales tax.
The state's not necessarily, but you think about, this is a valid argument. If you can bring in what this project is proposing for Oldham County schools, now I would argue it's not going to be that, and it's not accurate, but they're saying they'll get $54 million a year. So then you don't have a seek draw from this facility, $6 billion
just
facility.
This facility paying their property taxes.
So that's their estimate, which I think is highly inflated.
It
doesn't make sense.
Because hold on,
this is what they're saying.
$54 million a year. How many acres is it again?
It's 267 acres is the property. And then
I'm doing math. Hold on, everybody. Hold on. 267 acres.
I won't argue with your math because
people do not do though when they're talking about these things. So 50 million divided by 267 acres, right?
Yeah.
So that's $187,265 an acre in tax. Mm-hmm. So they're not talking about just this facility.
No, they're not
stating that this will raise property values around all the citizens. Yeah. But the problem is, and I'm so frustrated by this, and this is where it's like the government just does not care about the people that live there. And now I'm going to I'm sorry. But we're having a conversation on interview. But that means that, definitionally, they're going to have to be pulling that money off other citizens. Mm-hmm. And how many jobs is this data center going to bring?
Okay, so this is what they've said. Full-time, long-term jobs is only about 170.
170.
That's it. Okay, so very small number.
Now, is that in Oldham County or?
That's the question.
Is it remote?
We don't know.
It's a data center.
Yeah, they say they're trying to say it's going to bring 170 full-time jobs, but you have about 10 years, up to 10 years of construction, which could be, several thousand jobs. Now, some will be local, some won't be local.
They obviously won't.
Yeah, I mean, I know people who, my son's best friend is an electrician. They shipped him out to South Dakota to build one. They're flying them all over the place to build them. So that's another issue in and of itself, because you have do we have the infrastructure in Oldham County to have 2,000 extra people?
Well, you run into all kinds
years.
Of weird issues. Because I remember,
right,
I was traveling on the campaign trail, and I was in Hardin County area, near where the battery plant's being built.
Oh, yeah.
And for just basically, as I'd call it, a roach motel. I mean, it was clean, but it was older. And we were paying $120 a night as the campaign to stay in it and they had one room available because they were just full of all the people working at the plant. And so that causes this construction inflation. And so
in traffic, my goodness, the traffic. If you've ever been to our little community, it would be insane.
And so you get to traffic, you get to those issues. But on top of that, going back to the property tax issue, for the vast, vast majority, 99.99% of the people living in Oldham County who now have to shoulder a higher property tax, they don't make more money.
No.
Because they don't work at this data center. There's no job opportunities for them.
No.
So how does that benefit them?
Well, it doesn't.
And so,
we'll get supposedly, consider the numbers they're saying, which again are very inflated and I don't believe accurate. Consider how beautiful our schools could be if they had all that money. Consider how nice our ambulatory services.
They could at least could they make a promise about how well the kids could read, though? Did they make that promise?
That's another interview. Yeah.
Double it.
That's another issue.
So they can't do that.
No, they can't do that. And then I would argue, really when, they're making all these promises, and again, we don't have the end user here yet. So the end user may come in and do some negotiation, and we might have some pilots, right? Payment in lieu of taxes. You saw what happened with Churchill Downs making the promises to Jefferson County Public Schools that was just recently in the news, instead of paying their property tax.
You have step-in changes too. I mean, because you have, you had Bardstown make all these deals with these distilleries to come in and build because they were collecting the barrel tax. Sure. And then the state legislature comes in, and outlaws the barrel tax. They done made all these deals on property tax with them. Yeah. Based upon the idea they would bring in this revenue. Yeah. Now they're not bringing it in.
Yeah, that's really frustrating.
Yeah.
It's really frustrating. So,
And so let's talk about, my problem with these data centers isn't just so much that they literally seem like the least thought through thing I've seen our state government do so far, and our legislature do. And
solar panels, I would argue. I'd throw that one in there a little bit.
But
solar fields.
I don't see our state legislature pushing the solar.
No,
fields.
That was more of a federal thing. It really was. Yeah,
I'm talking about our state legislature, and I'm comparing this to them dumping $410 million on that battery plant in Ford. That's not going great.
Yeah.
So I can't think of this. This is such a head scratcher for me because I can't figure out the benefit. I'm hoping maybe you as a legislature around these people know what is actually driving this, because you're giving out millions of dollars of tax revenue giveaways.
Yeah.
You're causing the lives to be potentially much worse as far as their livability and the ability to afford living in the area for the citizens of your state, of your locales.
Mm-hmm.
You're putting in iSource, subsidizing iSource, right? You're doing all this, and it seems like a lot of negatives for the people, for the community, for everything else, without a lot of upsides. It doesn't produce a lot of jobs.
Yeah.
It doesn't produce, even if it produces all this money for Oldham County schools, let's say, from a state legislature standpoint, that doesn't matter. Your SEEK formula is not affected by it.
Yeah. No, you're right. Not for Oldham. I mean, Oldham doesn't get a huge SEEK allotment anyways. If these were to go in more rural communities and they could sustain their communities off of that tax base, that would affect the state.
Right. And so that's where it's like, I don't, and you talk about the data center downtown, they don't create a lot of jobs. You're giving away, with sales tax exemptions, everything else, the place you would have made revenues.
Yeah.
Who benefits from this? Other than maybe the schools, but do the power companies benefit from this?
They're making a ton of money off of this. I mean, they're happy about it.
But they have to build other plants and things, right? To be able to, you're talking,
if the Public Service Commission approves them to build more plants and more substations, then they're happy to do it. It's more money for them, right? But they're supplying more power to more people and more power in general. That's their commodity.
Sure. I guess if they but surely they strike deals, they're making
no doubt, sure,
less.
Yeah.
How much of that gets shouldered by the citizens? Do the citizens see their electric bills go up in these deals?
Well, that's a big concern of mine. I think we do need to put some protections in place and make sure that any additional power needed that doesn't fall on the citizen. It only falls on the data center to pay for that, because it definitely could. And it's not just Oldham County. It would be all the surrounding LGKU.
Tons of places.
Yeah, tons of rate increases could go up in a lot of communities. So that's something I think we really need to be concerned about. Another concern I have is just the grid itself. When you're needing that much power, is it sustainable? What happens when it isn't? When you look at the environmental impacts of how much diesel it could take to kick out 600 megawatts of power, that's about 1 million gallons of diesel a day to run one of these if the power goes down. Yeah. So those are big things we're not really thinking about. You've got to store 1 million gallons of diesel on site in case the power goes out. Right.
You'd probably have to store
3 times maybe is what I've heard. So a lot of things to think about that, it's this whole thing, the data center, this is being pushed now from the federal government as well. Like, this isn't just a local
from
thing.
The federal government.
Yeah.
Not specifically in Kentucky.
Yeah.
But I do see there being a national security thing.
No doubt. Absolutely.
Saying, hey, we want to make sure our data is kept
that
on
makes sense
our
for sure.
country soil, right? Mm-hmm. I understand that. You would think, though, that wouldn't take that much of a incentive push, just because, relatively speaking, the cost to build a data center outside of land cost is the same whether you build it in America or some other country. Because, while granted, there's a difference in labor, I get that, but the servers all cost the same amount no matter where. You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's not like a manufacturing facility where labor's your greatest cost.
Yeah.
Here it's power and the ability to deliver power. And, like I said, you'd think it would just be as simple as government saying, look, you got to build, if you want to handle U.S. consumer data, you have to be on U.S. soil with your servers.
Yeah.
And which makes sense. Mm-hmm. But, so I understand from the national government. I just don't understand it. I don't see it from the state government. I don't see the bigger picture here.
Yeah. Let me know when you find out.
Because
I'll let you know when I do.
Because, when they talk about so take the Ford battery plant. Dump $410 million. They say, well, look, it'll create all these. 1, it'll create 5,000 jobs. And 2, it'll create all these auxiliary things and it'll lead to future growth. And this fixes our employment problems and blah, blah, blah into the future. I don't see what problem this fixes. Mm-hmm. And that then leads into a question of, there's a lot of local pushback from Oldham County, right?
Oh, a ton. Yeah.
So the main person within the legislature who got this done and voted on was Jason Nemes.
Well, the data centers, no. I mean, it was his piece of legislation.
It was his piece of legislation.
It was a Senate committee substitute that added in everything about data centers.
I thought it was a House committee sub.
Nope.
Is it a Senate committee sub?
Yes.
That added
there
in
was
everything?
a House committee sub that did something different. It wasn't.
Oh, it did the Red River Gorge thing.
Yeah. That was separate. Yeah, that was the entertainment and
entertainment thing. I remember he took a 4-page bill and made it 150 pages, and I thought I had the data center.
No,
and
data centers came in on the Senate side.
On the Senate side. Same bill though.
Yep, same bill.
Same bill.
A&R, committee, which I've had to go back and watch and try to figure it all out. But yeah.
So that leads to, Nemes though could have came in and said, I don't, because the bill itself, the baseline of that bill was not very important.
No, it wasn't. No, and really what triggered this whole thing, they added the use tax. That was an addition. They added a few other caveats, but they struck out where it had to be in a county with a population of over 500,000. So that was in there. And now that was the biggest thing that opened it up to all of rural Kentucky. They struck that out. So now it can go anywhere, because before it was really limited to Jefferson County, the large. So,
but the baseline of the bill, here's what I don't get. Okay. So you have, because it's Nemes's bill, right?
Yeah, he was the original sponsor. Anybody could say, this is my bill, I want it to go through clean. If you put anything on it, it's dead.
Right.
Right.
And especially when you're the majority whip.
Yeah.
You could definitely kind of say, this isn't what I want the bill to do.
Yeah. I'm not going to throw Jason under the bus on this. And I think anybody in the process can get taken advantage of when you're coming 2 hours before the final vote and this gets added on. I mean,
right.
Honestly, things are moving so fast. You've seen it. You've watched it for years.
Yeah.
It comes and hundreds of pages, thousands of pages are dumped on you of changes in the last 24, 48 hours.
You can actually stop that from happening, though.
Well, I would have stopped it if I'd have known.
Yeah,
I would have.
I understand right. You would have. I'm saying, well, this goes into the overall process.
Yeah.
Of, you would think, you would hope, you'd look at it and say, if you're a legislator where this occurred, we're not saying it's Jason Nemes' fault per se.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's a risky thing and it looks bad.
Yeah.
That it was his bill that enabled this, and he's got that district. That's the risky part.
The other thing is, I don't know if Jason knew about this project in Oldham County. I have no idea. He may have.
Go on.
I did not.
You won't know, but
I did not know. He may have known. So when I looked at that, this legislation moving through, there was nothing in it that would have indicated to me that my district could be a recipient of a data center.
Sure.
Not to mention, had I any inclination, if we were on the list to get a data center, that our local government would have handled it the way that they did. Holy cow.
So let's go to that. How has your local government handled it that has created
Woo! Well, so it's been quite fun, and it's really stuff like this that inspired me to run for office in general way back when. So they were approached. We had a planning and zoning commissioner who retired. He was in for 17 years, I believe, in Oldham County, maybe 12. My numbers might be off. He retired, became the consultant for the data company.
Oh, that's nice.
That helped.
What's that pay?
I have no idea.
Good work if you can get it.
I know. There was nothing illegal in that move, but
nothing illegal.
Is definitely in a position he has lots of knowledge on. So they approached some of our local leaders in, I believe, February is what he told me. I don't know what point in February, about this proposed data center, and the attorney brought forward to them, and we've learned a lot of this through open records that our community members have done. They brought forward, we are looking at this property and we have a purchase agreement if we're able to move forward, and we don't want to change the zoning. We want a conditional use permit. We want to call ourselves a private utility. So that was that. So the ball started rolling.
And so you touched on this earlier, the significance of, we don't want you to change the zoning. We want it to be calling ourselves a private utility.
Yeah.
So the significance of that is then into the future on any land currently zoned that same way, they could just...
You just call yourself a private utility.
You could just call yourself...
Yeah.
They can, from there on out, continue to build, at least in Oldham County, without having to get another conditional use permit.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Well, I believe you'd have to get a conditional use permit on every property, but the precedent would be set.
Right.
That it can
You'd
be
have
done
more
that way.
standing.
Yeah, and you can have you can call yourselves a private utility. There's a lot of disagreement with calling a data center a private utility. We don't have a definition of that. Our state statutes defines utility, which is providing a service to the community that they are compensated for. This obviously doesn't fit utility by definition itself. So it's a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, it's a bit of a stretch, because also that definition, I mean, any service at all could be considered
It's specific. Utility by definition in our statutes is water, sewer, electricity.
Right.
It's pretty specific. Telecommunications, which I guess they could twist that a little bit, but they're still not getting
work for server,
compensation from and providing a direct service to members of the community, like a utility does, right?
Yeah,
like everybody's got power, everybody's got water. Not everybody's utilizing AI. I can guarantee you.
Or if
my
they
mom
are,
never
they're
will.
still they're not necessarily utilizing that server,
right?
It's like where if you are using the internet phone lines being run,
sure,
that ISP provider is you are directly paying that ISP provider. In this case,
exactly.
If you're using that AI group is then paying this group for that server farm.
Yeah, right.
So there's some middlemen. So
for
you're
sure.
not providing the direct service.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah. So a lot of that, and it's been frustrating to really watch our local government kind of push this process along, because if you're not changing the zoning, it will go right to a board of adjustments. Those are appointed members. They are not elected officials. So this was set up, it still technically is set up, to be passed and adopted and come into our community without one elected member voting on it. A $6 billion project. And no elected official being able to be held accountable. So if you go through a planning and zoning change, that at least has to be approved by the fiscal court.
Right.
This would not. This would just be a conditional use permit. Like, hey, I want to put a shed in my backyard. I need a conditional use permit, right?
Same board.
This is not a shed. This is a huge facility.
Sally Mae down the street asking to put up a 100% privacy fence versus, I would like a variance to a 7-foot tall fence because my dog can jump really high.
Yeah.
And then they'll vote on that. And then the next one up, $6 billion server farm.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So it's kind of, okay, that was really not a good path to go forward. It looks really bad. So we've had a lot of our local magistrates doing their own research, digging in. And it's interesting. If you watch some of our fiscal court meetings, I would encourage everybody to go to YouTube and check out some of the opposition to this. And it's been encouraging, I would say, to say the least. We've had thousands of community members that are just spending so much time researching, advocating, showing up. And boy, they are, filing, one meeting after another, and we'll have a couple hundred people there at every meeting who are actively engaged. And that's encouraging to see. And so, from both sides of the political spectrum too. So you've got Democrats, Republicans, doesn't matter. We're united on, absolutely.
Issue.
Yeah.
It's not really something that, you fall. So based upon what you're seeing, I mean, do you think the fiscal court continues to allow this to go forward with just a conditional use permitting process, or do you think they try to draw it back and vote on it and vote it down?
So right now we're in the process of adopting a moratorium on data centers in general for our county. However, this application's already been filed, so they can't. That one, unfortunately, is grandfathered in. The location this one has proposed, I don't think I'm hopeful it won't go through. I can't speak to that, but I'm very hopeful that won't go through just because of the amount of opposition. But it's very possible that they could try to get it in another part of our county. Right now, we don't really have a heavy industrial zoned area that really meets.
Well, people leave Louisville to go to Oldham County,
to get away from.
It's like one of those things where it's like you don't really want.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
That's the people of that community say, hey, look, this is what we don't really want to deal with. And I understand the struggle, the fights of weighing off different, uses and not. Obviously, where I lived in Lexington so long and I saw so much abuse, though, of those types of things to go after people.
Yeah.
Recently, they had a guy down on a road. He's like next to the railroad tracks, and he wanted to store equipment for his business, heavy equipment, on his lot of land that he has there. And it's like Amazon Prime, distribution center, railroad tracks, his property.
And he wasn't able to.
And the city council's like, no, you can't do that.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm like, all right, this is ridiculous. Like,
wow.
Hey, we don't want you to, make the neighborhood look bad next to the old distribution center and the railroad tracks.
Right. Okay.
So I've seen that get misused. So whenever I see it, I still, you concern about it. But at the same time, as we talked about, the fact that there's so much subsidizing having to go on here.
Yeah.
Is certainly it. I mean, this goes in line with, recently we saw the legislators putting forward special giveaways to cryptocurrency mining operations.
Oh yeah, there's a facility. Have you seen about that facility in Wolfe County?
I've heard about it.
Oh my gosh, I watched a. I saw an article. It had a link to a video, and man, the noise. It sounds like cicadas 24/7.
Isn't it owned by Brandon Smith?
I've heard that.
I've heard that it's owned by Senator.
I think he works
State Senator Brandon Smith, or he works there or something.
Yeah, I don't know that that's a secret. I don't know. I have heard that too.
I don't know if it's a secret either.
I guess it's not now.
I've heard it's got something to do with them.
Yeah,
and so which is interesting.
It is indeed interesting,
but putting that to the side.
Yeah.
But that's the other thing. Why give that giveaway? Literally produces like no jobs.
No, 0 jobs.
Other than maybe Brandon Smith's job.
Maybe. I don't know.
We don't know that for a fact. But yeah, produces like no jobs. So I'm not saying you come in and outlaw saying, hey, look, you can't bring in a cryptocurrency mining operation here necessarily.
Yeah.
That needs to be looked at if you're creating noise pollution.
Right. It's got to be
people
considered.
in the area. Then you are affecting other people's properties.
Absolutely.
And other people's lives in a way. It's not just you saying, not just, oh, it's an eyesore, but literally like you are causing me headaches and things based upon your behavior. Yeah. But even there, it's like, what is the purpose here?
Good question. It's this whole crypto, AI, all of these things. This is the direction like technology's going towards. Like we can't ignore it. I mean, the amount of people. Listen, here's what it was. We were sitting in a meeting. This was so funny. There's a couple hundred people there at this meeting about the data centers. We were learning about the environmental impacts of these data centers from some professors at University of Louisville. So it was very interesting. Well, somebody didn't have their phone on silence, and they had asked AI a question. And I'm like, there you go. Like it's everywhere. Like we can't ignore AI. And even the people who are opposed to these data centers that they need these data centers because of AI are using AI, right? Like it's just everywhere. I was just at the dentist. She looked at my cavities with AI, an AI tool, so how do we balance this? How do we balance it?
How many times we're calling like what is just a normal computer program AI now?
Well, that's a good question.
I always wonder about that branding thing where it's like, because before AI was like a commonplace thing, there's all kinds of computer programs and things that would do various things of it went from, you could for a long time use a voice search. Yeah. Use a voice command to say, hey, Google. Yeah. What's, what color contrasts best with green or something like that. Right. And Google would take that voice input and would just simple code. Oh, this is the command. They want me to search Google search for that. I'll Google search for that and then show them the results, right? Right. That was just computer
program. Now they just call it AI.
But now they call it AI. And I'm like, I don't see how it's functionally that different.
Maybe it's
personally.
faster. I don't know. I have my own concerns with AI.
I would call it AI when like, hey, summarize this article for me. Yeah. And then they go through and they read it in like seconds and then summarize it for you, right? Yeah. I'd call that AI. Yeah. I just wonder if we're getting a little fancy with calling things AI that aren't AI. But regardless.
Maybe so.
Regardless. So what would you say? You're coming up on the end of your first term as senator, right? Yep. Mm-hmm. You're running for re-election?
Yeah, I'm going to run
okay.
again.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah.
Big news.
I may lose my race over this data center stuff.
Why would you lose your race?
I don't know.
Data
I'm
center?
making people mad, I
You
guess.
think that the data center, well, they come in, they're like, she ruined our $6 billion project.
I know. Who knows? Yeah.
I'm going to run somebody against her.
Yeah.
Oh, geez. Wouldn't it be such a...
I don't,
such a
it's
weird
fine.
world if you end up running against that zoning commissioner that was hired as a consultant?
Yeah, wouldn't that be interesting? I don't think so.
Anyways, we'll put that.
I don't think so, but no, I love what I do. I've really enjoyed it. I would love another 4 years to keep doing it. But on this issue, I'm like, this is my home before, I love my district. I try to do my best to represent my district, but this ultimately is my home. I grew up a few miles from where this thing is supposed to go. Like, I'm going to do everything I can to protect Oldham County because I love it. It's where I grew up.
So when it comes to your first term, right? You come in, what has been kind of just the grossest, shockingest thing where you're just like, oh my gosh, government is so dirty.
Oh my.
That is just, you can talk generally, you can talk specific.
Yeah.
It's just about.
I'll talk specifically about, and I will say I came in not having been in politics at all.
Right.
I came in just thinking everybody was the boogeyman. And then I get in there and I'm like, oh, there's some really good people in here who just love Kentucky and want to serve Kentucky. I was surprised by that. Yeah. Because if you're an outside, you're very critical of politics in general, being in. But so there's a lot of really great people that I work with.
Just getting bad information.
Sometimes. Yeah, sure.
I think
it's hearsay.
They're good people.
Oh, absolutely.
But if you control the input.
Oh, absolutely.
You can control the person.
And I see that now, being that person on the inside and what the news reports about things that I'm doing that, people think I'm just the worst thing ever, but whatever.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely, you just have to get in there and get to know people. One thing I will tell you, watching the lobby arm of government is really a frustrating thing. In particular, the driver's licensing. And the regional licensing that we're
so somebody's lobbying on that.
100%. Yeah.
Okay. What is the lobbying forces on driver's licensing?
So and the history of that goes back to the Bev administration. I don't know if you've done a show about this. It's
I think I've mentioned the history a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, I've mentioned in passing that the county clerk's offices didn't want
it was the circuit clerks.
Or circuit clerks, didn't want driver's licensing anymore. And so they were happy to hand it off to the state.
Yeah, it was more like we refuse. Like we refuse to do it. And Governor Bevin at the time was like, okay, fine, we'll do these regional centers. So that was kind of the move towards what we have now.
Right.
And it's like that move just like squirted the toothpaste all out of the tube. And it's like trying to get that back in and understand, okay, we really needed this on the local level. It functioned well on the local level, and now it's a nightmare and we keep trying to fix it.
Right.
But the only true fix is at the local level. So the last several years, there's been legislation. I filed one this year. I believe Senator Higdon filed one to try and get our county clerks to be able to do it if they choose. Right? It wasn't even like you have to. It's like if you want to do it, we want to give you the tools to be able to do driver's licensing in your county, which I called all of my county clerks. They said, absolutely, please. We would love to do it. We'd love the revenue.
There's been turnover too, since then.
Well, so do you know why that failed? At least the last 2 years, it may have been.
Why.
The lobbyists killed it because they didn't want the county clerks to lose their elections if they didn't choose to have licensing in their county.
For which group?
The county clerks.
The County Clerks Association. Mm-hmm.
They killed it.
Which, by the way, how does that lobbying group get its money?
Well, isn't that an interesting, yes. Just like some of our school lobbying arms. That's all.
I mean, they're paid association fees by the circuit.
Yeah.
Clerk.
Yeah. Well, that's the argument with the KSBA, and they're lobbying against Amendment 2 for school choice.
Right.
And the school boards, which are funded by taxpayer dollars,
right?
Join the KSBA with taxpayer dollars,
right?
And then the KSBA lobbies against
You're
our
just
legislature.
laundering the money to lobby it
it's
through.
Just
it's the same thing with the county clerks. I mean,
a big circle.
They join or circuit clerks. They join the association. They use taxpayer funds to pay their join fees. That pays for the lobbyists. That then lobby it. But why are they so effective? Why is it that? So you said, well, that's
what I can't figure out.
Right, because it's like. you say the lobbyists killed it because they're worried about circuit clerks. It's like, okay, but like, I don't really care. Who's going to attack me for it?
That's my philosophy. I'm like, okay, you have tens of thousands of people incredibly inconvenienced right now trying to renew their license, waiting for months to get a permit. I mean, this is insanity that is affecting everybody in Kentucky.
To lose your election over, not voting for, not
I don't know.
having the bill. But of course they get to blame it because that catch-22, if the lobbyists killed behind the scene, they can be like, I don't know, just some people didn't want it, but they can never tell you who those people are.
It wasn't me. That is really frustrating.
But I don't see what they're so worried about. Oh, the Circuit Clerks Association might run a mailer against me.
I know. I guess there's some pressure and influence. Of course, we've watched how the teachers union and JCTA in particular, which is a huge union in Jefferson County for the teachers, that is able to heavily influence legislation and Supreme Court races and different things. So
at least
people get afraid. They get afraid that they're going to,
at least they're dumping hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Oh, yeah.
Into campaigns and elections.
Yeah. This is
just the Circuit Court Clerks Association isn't.
I don't get it. This is a question I don't understand because you're not going to buy me to like just totally step all over the people of Kentucky. This would be a huge win for the Republican Party if we stood up and said, no, we're going back to our counties. That's it. And at this point, what we're left with is trying to keep correcting a huge problem with one more regional center here. And that is like the next best thing. Okay, let's absolutely get new centers in the areas that are affected the most.
Why they didn't, like, if the circuit clerks are like, we didn't want to do this, right?
Yeah.
Why didn't the state just say, okay, we'll establish a regional office within your office. We'll take the same employees you have doing driver's licensing now.
Wouldn't that have made sense?
And we will hire them on for the state. Yeah. And they will get on our system. We'll retrain those people. Everybody can go to the same place. Mm-hmm. Just technically, those two desks over there are run by the state. And then the benefit to the circuit clerks would be, we'll pay you a rent of, per desk of $400 a month. Yeah. And that can go into your budget.
Right.
And so that way you have more in your budget. If we have 3-4 desks here, you're good to go. That would
have been great. That would have been a great solution. I don't know why it went this way.
They didn't think that through. Huh?
No, they didn't think that through. It was an executive. It's, Department of Transportation is an executive branch government. So
just being 100% honest, and, any leftists watching this will probably freak out and clip this, but I'm going to be honest with you too. Going to like Fayette County area licensing centers, it's the fact that like nobody there speaks English.
Oh, that's Jefferson County as well.
I mean, it is everybody coming through there is just, they don't speak English. Mm-hmm.
You mean the employees? No. Oh, okay. So in Jefferson County, there's a lot of employees that
I'm sure a lot of employees probably don't speak English either because you have all these people coming in that don't speak English as customers.
Oh, so then you're
so
sure that holds up the process.
How do you have somebody who can speak Swahili, Spanish, French, that can speak
Haitian,
Arabic,
lots of
all these different languages.
You don't. Well, that's what you use AI for.
Yeah,
you're Google Translate, right?
So you end up, in order to service that, though, you end up hiring people like, oh, I can speak Swahili. Okay, you're hired, but I can't really speak English very well. It's okay. We're more concerned about having somebody who can speak Swahili.
Yeah.
Because, we're trying to hand out driver's licenses to people who can't speak English. And so...
it's a huge problem.
It's a big problem. Yeah. And I hear... I don't know if you listen to like Matt Walsh show and things like that all the time. I do.
I see his Twitter stuff, but I don't listen to him much.
He makes this point about bad driving, how driving's getting worse. And he points out that he's like, a lot of these third world country immigrants are bringing in, they're coming from countries that don't have laws like on the road.
Yeah. So we lived in the Dominican Republic for 4 years. We lived that type of driving.
Right.
It can be really fun, but it's really dangerous. But no, you're absolutely right. But if I were to go to the Dominican Republic and want to get a Dominican driver's license, my test would have to be in Spanish. I would have to be speaking that language to be able to get it. I couldn't go and say, I want to test in English.
Right. And
that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Right. So we're the only ones that have to accommodate, but the rest of the world does not do that.
You think just being able to speak English would be important to it?
It's very important, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. But anyway, so the lobbying arm, seeing that happen with that side of things. But is it, so you watch the lobbyists do their work. Mm-hmm. You wonder why they're so effective. Yeah. How do we change it? What do we do?
I don't know. I don't know how to fix it. We get people, and I try to encourage my colleagues to just say no. Just have us, if we have a backbone to say no to the lobbyist, we say no to the lobbyist. But it's not that easy, I guess, on some issues. I'm sure. I don't, it's every issue has different components to it that, make people vote one way or another. So
what has been, one of the bills that you've put forward a few times that I've talked about on the show once or twice, simply just because, and as you know, discovering that we're handing out as a state hundreds of thousands of dollars to LGBT groups to literally put on drag shows. Like that's what the contract's for.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And you've put forward a bill to say, hey, look, let's not, amongst other things, but this can't be taxpayer funded.
Absolutely,
right? Yeah. And it hasn't passed. Mm-hmm. Why is that?
I don't know, but I have my suspicions. I think, when I first brought that bill forward in 2023, the question I got the most was, is this happening in Kentucky? And my answer was, probably, yes, I'm almost certain. But regardless, I don't want it to happen in Kentucky. Mm-hmm. I'm seeing it happen all over the country. Why would we not get ahead of this? Right? Like, that's just my thinking. So I think a lot of...
and then it turns out
it actually is. Yeah, I was right.
You felt so validated.
Yeah,
you're like, oh my goodness.
I was right.
That's a $600,000 contract for vaccine drag shows.
Yes, exactly. It's just
my two
insane.
favorite things.
It is absolute insanity. I will say, though, what happened at the Capitol the last couple of days of session this year, I'm very hopeful we will pass some legislation. And I know you know about that, but maybe your listeners don't. So there was a Pride Day or something at the Capitol. There's one every session that the Fairness Campaign puts on. And there's a guy there, 6'3", 4", I don't know, big guy in a glittery dress see-through dress with a thong on. And he's using the women's restroom.
I know. I see women wearing those kinds of things all the time.
Oh, they come to the Capitol, sure, right? Yeah. Give me a break. Nobody wears that. It wouldn't be allowed if a woman did it, see? But for some reason it's allowed if a man does it. So he's using the women's restroom. There's a woman in there nursing her baby. There's kids in there. Like, it absolutely crazy. And so you had one of our House members go in, Bill Wesley, and confront him and say, get out. You cannot be here. So this made some news.
And then he got smacked by Senator Berg.
Oh, yeah. And then Senator Berg smacked him. She got kicked out of that. She can never go on the House floor again. So it's just crazy. I'm like, there's never a dull moment around here. But I'm glad it happened. I'm like, thank you for showing us that you just absolutely do not care what the people of Kentucky want. And you're just blatantly revealing what you stand for.
And the thing too, this is I don't want to call it weird thing, but just like, okay, if I'm shoe on the other foot, right? And I've been in some protracted political fights around certain issues, COVID things, and as such. An example I give, and I've been knocked for it by leftists on Facebook and social media, trying to say, he was super into masks. Because when I was first trying to fight against business lockdowns, when I gave interviews, I'd wear a mask. Not that I like masks. I never wore masks before. I never even required my staff to wear masks before that.
Good. You shouldn't
I said, hey, if you've got a medical condition you don't wear, I don't care. But I wore one for those interviews because I understood that there would be people who would, while they would agree that a business should be able to operate, they also believed masks did something.
Yeah.
And so let's win this fight on businesses being allowed to operate how they see fit or within reasonable, quote unquote, restriction, just being able to be open, period.
Right.
Let's win that argument first. And then let's move to the next argument and just kind of progress it to where, okay, now we're dealing with all this overall. And granted, it's an outlawed state goal, but that's just how you work your way to that, right? You collect as many people as you can, get a thing passed, and then try to, and maybe along the way you end up dragging some people around to point Z that would have gotten hung up at point D.
Right.
You know, if whatever. Point is that why do they always end up with, like, I've seen the pictures. That dude was built like a brick house. Like, that guy was starting lineman for a football team.
Yeah.
Like, why do you get the most masculine, most like egregious, wearing the most egregious things people possible, instead of running through like, hey, let's first run through somebody that everybody looks at and isn't like, ugh.
Yeah. Because I don't think they care anymore. I think they're fine to reveal who they are and what their colors are. And
more ways than one.
No, exactly, right? Like, they're just like, here we are. This is what we stand for. And we want to be in women's restrooms. We want to be in there with thongs on. We want kids to have to get over it and women to get over it.
One of the arguments I heard when your bill was moving through on dealing with taxpayer-funded drag shows and drag shows in general was like, this is really good for our economy. And a lot of concern about this being bad for tourism and everything else. I even heard some Republicans voicing that through that process. Is that something you still hear? Is that do you think that's a real reason why it doesn't go through? Do you think Republicans secretly don't have a single issue with this? And they just don't want to talk about it? What do you think it is?
I don't know. I know there's a couple of facilities in Jefferson County and Fayette County in particular that do like brunch, like drag show brunches at restaurants. And apparently it's very profitable for them. But they're open to the public. Anybody going in that restaurant, if you just wanted to go get lunch one day, you might stumble upon, some guy with giant fake boobs and his butt hanging out, dancing and taking money from babies. I mean, you just might have to get over that. So, I don't hear a lot about it. I mean, really, like, sure, you want to get involved in adult entertainment. There's a place for that. Sure. That's always been in a proper place. We don't allow restaurants to have strip clubs happening in broad daylight for families to come to, like, right. Like, why is, for some reason, drag has become this untouchable thing that's just about inclusion. Well, why don't they make that argument for women who strip? Of course, right? Like,
well, they would.
Oh, I don't know. They haven't gone there yet, but maybe they will. I don't know.
Sex work is work.
No, you're right. They do try that,
Senator,
too.
Don't you know? That's real work.
Well,
but that's part of it. So, running for re-election, do we fix it all in your lifetime?
No. Only thing you fix is all this mess is Jesus.
What can anybody do to help out, make a difference? What's your advice to anybody listening that hears these things and says, outside of, hey, get with your local fiscal courts and get some ordinances in place?
Yeah, definitely regarding data centers. Like make sure you guys are prepared. They're coming. They're coming your way. If you've got the power, the water, and the fiber, they're coming your way. So just make sure your local governments are prepared for that. And then they're done. If it's done properly, that's a different issue. I mean, they do have other concerns in general, but let's make sure it's at least run through in the proper way. Sure. I'd just say get involved, man. I've had so much fun getting involved in politics. I never thought I would be here. That's a good thing that happened with COVID, I guess. It woke up a lot of people. And that's it. That's how we take our government back. It is a government for the people. We need to be involved. And we have sat back too long, way too long. And it's time that people just plug in.
Easily manipulated too. I mean, if you read Axios had that article out, and of course, they had Jake Cox they quoted in it, which
I don't really know him.
Several $1 million, go for it. If you want to hire him as a consultant and not win a single race, anyways. But regardless, one lost all the others, dumped like millions of dollars,
wow.
And he was in there talking about, obviously, the whole Massey Trump thing.
Yeah.
Not going into that per se, but in that article, one of the things they brought up was that, who could be a contender? And Kim Mosier was brought up. And
run against Massey?
Yeah.
Oh.
And the fact that we live in a world where I could foresee it, that you could have Massey versus Kim Mosier, and somehow Kim Mosier's the one that the pro-Trump crowd is vocally supporting, tells me that, hey, look, we need to really start understanding how we can be manipulated in our voting, because Kim Mosier is the farthest thing from a MAGA person. You may have an issue with Thomas Massey, but Kim Mosier's nowhere near it.
Yeah.
And
people they haven't been paying attention.
Well,
they don't remember
how much is in bills. Like they look at a vote.
No, you're
like,
right.
Why would you vote no against that, or why would you vote yes for that? And
you're right about that.
Do you know what was everything in that bill?
Yeah,
and they do that on purpose.
Oh yeah, they do. I hate that.
So frustrating.
I hate that. As somebody who has to vote on that stuff, it's very frustrating. It's very frustrating. I mean, I voted for the budget last year and then find out like 2 days later, I changed my vote to a no. Unfortunately, it doesn't change on the record, but the COVID immunity for our universities, that they could never be sued for how they treated COVID. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. This directly affected my family. And you're telling me there's no recourse for that type of behavior when the state's giving them hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars? Well, that's insane.
Going to the budget bill too, I asked, this was over in the House. I asked 11 legislators. I said, hey, I noticed in the budget bill, we're spending X amount more money than we were from the prior year. Prior 2 years, on average, we're spending this amount more. But we're not raising taxes, and we don't have that amount in our rainy day fund. We're not actually spending any of our rainy day fund in that bill. Where is the money coming from? Where has it come from? Where have we increased our tax revenues? How much have we increased them? What's the percentage? Because that like when it comes down to it, you can hide tax burdens in a lot of different taxes, a lot of different ways. But at the end of the day, you look at how much revenue is coming into the government, where it's coming from, and that will tell you just how much we're being taxed.
Yeah.
Right? Because the money only comes from one place. And so I asked that. I said, before you vote on the budget, and not all of them voted yes or no or anything else, but I said, I'd love an answer to this question. None of them could give me the answer. Like, just get a basic breakdown. Hey, we've seen this amount of increase in revenues from sales tax. We've seen this amount of increase in revenues from insurance tax. We've seen this amount of increase in licensing fees. We've seen this amount of increase. And you would think that'd be pretty basic. Like, if I'm voting on a budget.
Yeah.
And a constituent, because I understand you got a lot going on, constituent comes to you and brings this, or non-constituent technically, but a citizen, brings this thing to you just asking a simple question before you vote on a budget. Hey, it's this much more than last year. Where'd all that money come from?
Yeah. That's a great question.
And simple, the kind of thing you'd ask in your own household when you're doing a budget.
Yeah.
And none of them could answer it.
Yeah.
Now, not everybody voted yes that I asked it to, but the point is that some of them did. And it's just confusing. That's the part that's confusing to me, is that,
especially with income tax going away, right? Like, that's less revenue as well.
If it's going away.
I think it is going away.
You think
this is why we need to Doge. My Doge bill didn't pass. Part of it got into another bill, but this is why we need an Office of Government Efficiency, and then we need the legislature to actually
do something
about it.
Not like always my argument though on it is that, and I brought this up to a degree, and kind of the same way I think Rand Paul was hitting on it at the same time, because we were all concerned about what we're seeing now at the federal level.
Yeah.
Where you find all these Doge cuts and then nothing happens.
And they don't do anything about it.
They don't do anything about it. And so, my point has always been, okay, so we currently have this government contract review committee. They say, hey, it's got no teeth.
I want to be on that committee so bad. I'm going to have to ask to be on that committee.
But yeah. So they have this. Douglas is the chair, I believe, for the,
is he?
For the thing. On the Senate side. So you have this government contract review committee, and they say, look, it's got no teeth. We can't do anything, because if we say no to a contract, then it just goes to the finance secretary, and then he can override it. And they're trying to change it over to the treasurer. Is the veto, because you have to have a veto of some sort. And where the legislature is out of session, they can't overcome that veto, so they get final veto. So they're like, we don't have any teeth, right? And so I've said, okay, well, why don't, and I was talking to members of the committee, and I said, well, why don't you, when you come into session, just put all those contracts that you said no to in a bill and pass it saying those contracts not anymore. Mm-hmm. And then very quickly, when you say no, these people won't do it. And he said, well, he said, the one legislator I was talking to said this. I don't know if it's true or not, but this is what he said. He said, well, we've tried that, and the Supreme Court came back saying we cannot single out specific contracts and end them.
Like special legislation? Is that what?
Yeah, we can't pass a bill saying this specific contract is ended.
But you're doing several different contracts.
And he's like, that's what I've been told, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, fine then. How about you just pass a budget bill that says, you don't have to say this in the bill, but you say, you all spent $10 million in contracts that we voted no on last year. So
$10
we're
million
taking $10 million out of your budget.
100%. Let's do it.
And that's easy. And when I said that, the one legislator I was talking to specifically about this was like, well, I'll run that by leadership and see what they say and see if that's possible. So I haven't heard anything back.
Yeah.
But regardless, that's simple, straightforward. Mm-hmm. I'm just a guy. Yeah. I'm not a legislator.
Yeah.
I can't have been the only one to think about this. It literally took me 10 minutes of conversation to throw out a solution that apparently hasn't been tried yet. And yet it's like a refusal to act on these things, and that's where I've always kind of been hung up, where it's like, we can identify all the waste in the world, but they don't want to do anything about it. It seems like.
We keep funding it. Yeah.
I mean, geez. And about the only thing good, and I did a post about this, an episode about this, where the only thing good coming out of Bashir saying no to implementing all these laws without first getting a bribe, basically, from the government, is that it might actually force the legislature to be fiscally conservative. Because they're going to have to line item budget them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We do need to.
I mean,
yeah,
it's the only option.
It's big reform that needs to happen, and that was with putting that Office of Government Efficiency in the auditor's office. That was like my hope. We had talked about it because we were talking about at the beginning of session, like how do we make sure we get to zero income tax? Like how do we make sure? And I'm like, I know the money's there. I have watched the spending in so many areas of our government that is just complete wasteful spending. Absolutely wasteful. Like tons of money, right? I know it's there. How do you find it? And so DOGE that was operating on the federal government, that was through the executive branch, which of course we can't do that in Kentucky, right? We don't have the executive branch right now, and it just wouldn't happen. Yeah.
You do have other members of the executive branch.
We've got obviously we have the auditor, we have the treasurer, we have some areas where we could utilize them, but to actually implement, if the auditor comes back and says, okay, here's where we see the waste in Department of Transportation, we've got to pull that. Well, you're going to get that's where the fight comes in, right?
The legislature, though, just has to pass it.
Exactly.
Period.
So, but we got to know what it is. We got to know where it is. But now, so anyways, it's incremental, right? Incremental change that hopefully will lead us to something bigger. But the DOGE stuff, it is so disappointing on the federal level. They're not cutting that junk out. It's really frustrating. I hope the Senate.
Frustrating, but not
surprising. No, you're right.
Well, y'all, thank you all so much for joining us. Senator Tichenor, thank you.
Thank you for having me on.
What's your website?
I think it's Tichenor for Senate or Lindsey for Liberty.
You're like absolutely
just Google
the
me.
worst politician in the world.
I haven't campaigned in 3 years.
She's an amazing politician.
I'm not a politician. I'm not a politician.
You should vote for her because she's not an amazing politician. Just a normal person.
Google my name.
So she doesn't even know.
Ignore the
how
bad
to tell
stuff.
You how to give her money. That is the mark of a real human being right there. Somebody who's uncomfortable with you giving her money to run for office. Well, Senator, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.
For joining us. To all of you all, I hope you have a great rest of your day.